What would you do if you were just a maid? And one day, the prince looked at you like you were royalty? Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, because this story, it's about to take you from the palace kitchens, all the way to the royal throne. She wasn't supposed to be anything special. Not in their eyes. She was just a Lyra. Quiet, kind, quick with her hands, and quicker with her smile. Most days, no one even remembered her name. She scrubbed the same marble floors. Polished the same gold-framed mirrors. Always careful to stay out of the way. But today was different. The courtyards were filled with people. The sun was warm on the silk banners. And the prince, yes, the prince, stood before the entire kingdom. Holding her hand. She wore a dress spun from silver and dreams. And when he looked at her, it was like the world disappeared. The crowd held their breath. And someone whispered, "Isn't that the palace maid?" But not even the loudest whispers could touch her now. Just months ago, she'd been sweeping the halls with nothing but calluses on her palms and hope in her heart. Now, she was becoming queen. So how did it happen? How does a girl with no title, no riches, no noble blood, find herself at the center of a love story even the bards couldn't make up? It didn't begin with a ball. Or a love at first sight. It began with spilled tea, muddy boots, and a prince who didn't quite know how to smile. It began with Lyra. And the day she stepped into the palace as a maid. Not knowing that every step she took was bringing her closer to something far greater than she could ever imagine. Lyra was born on a rainy morning. Not in a grand chamber or wrapped in silk. But in a cottage with a leaky roof. Where her mother whispered lullabies between tears and thunder. No royal blood. No famous lineage. Just a girl from nowhere, in a village no map ever bothered to name. She grew up with dirt on her knees and light in her eyes. The kind of child who made dandelion crowns and believed they were real. The kind who shared her bread even when there wasn't enough. Her father was a woodcutter. Gentle, quiet. And gone too soon. Her mother worked as a laundress. Hands always red from the cold stream. But her voice warm like morning sun. They didn't have much. But they had love. And that was enough. Until it wasn't. When her mother fell ill, Lyra was just 14. She did everything, carried water, chopped wood. Even worked in the village tavern. Serving gruff men with rough hands and louder laughs. But no matter how hard she worked, her mother faded like candlelight in the wind. When she passed, the house felt too big. The silence too loud. And Lyra, still just a girl, was alone. That winter, she packed her mother's shawl, tied up her hair, and walked to the capital. Not for glory. Not for dreams. Just to survive. The palace was hiring help. They needed someone small, quiet, forgettable. She fit the part perfectly. And just like that, Lyra became a maid. No one asked where she came from. No one cared. To them, she was just another broom in the hallway. Another pair of hands to polish the golden lives of others. But even in silence, Lyra noticed everything. She saw kindness in unexpected places. Loneliness behind polished smiles. And cruelty, hidden in silk and lace. She didn't know it yet. But the palace wasn't just her job. It was the place that would test her heart. Shape her destiny. And one day, reveal the crown she was never meant to wear. But always deserved. Every kingdom has its golden boy. Tall, poised, born with a crown-shaped shadow. And in this one, it was Prince Gale. On paper, he was perfect. First in line to the throne. Educated by scholars, trained by knights. And watched by everyone. Every day, every moment, since the day he was born. People called him cold. Reserved. A little too serious for someone so young. But what they didn't see was what Lyra saw. She first glimpsed him on a spring morning, carrying a sword, surrounded by guards. He was walking through the training yard. Chin up, armor shining like he belonged in a storybook. And yet, his eyes said something else. Tired. Lonely. Like someone who hadn't taken a real breath in years. Cale didn't smile much. Not because he was cruel, but because he never quite learned how. He'd grown up in a world where everything was rehearsed. Every word, every bow, every smile carefully measured. Even the meals were quiet. Even laughter felt like a mistake. At night, when the palace slept, he'd sneak away to the old library tower. Not to study war or strategy, but to read old fairy tales. The ones where love was simple, and heroes didn't have to choose between duty and heart. Cale had secrets. Not the kind written in scrolls or locked in vaults, but the kind buried deep in the chest, where longing hides beside fear. He didn't know her name. Not yet. But he had noticed her. The girl in the background. The one who didn't flinch under his gaze. The one who once whispered "excuse me" as she passed. Without trembling or pretending. It wasn't love. Not yet. But something about her lingered. Like a melody you hear once, and somehow remember forever. He didn't know it then, but she was the only one in the palace who would ever truly see him. And in a place where everything was polished and perfect. That kind of gaze was dangerous. Palaces may shine with gold on the outside, but inside, they're made of shadows. And Alira was starting to see just how deep those shadows went. She kept her head down, did her work, smiled politely and disappeared before anyone could really see her. But in a place built on status and silence, even a quiet smile can be mistaken for rebellion. It started small. A missing brush. A spilled bucket she didn't leave. Whispers that turned louder when she walked by. And then came Lady Morelle. Daughter of a duke. Graceful. Sharp. Draped in silks that whispered louder than most people spoke. She had eyes like mirrors, cold and clear. And she watched Alira the way a hawk watches a feather drifting too close to the sky. You see, Morelle had plans. She wasn't just born into power. She intended to marry it. And the prince? He was supposed to be part of that plan. She noticed it first. The way Cale paused when Alira entered the room. The softness in his tone when he asked her name. The quiet tension. That wasn't so quiet anymore. Morelle smiled, of course. She always smiled. But her words began to sting, sugar-coated in elegance. Oh dear. Did you mean to curtsy like that? The servants are getting bold these days. I suppose even mice want to be seen. And Alira. She didn't fight back. She just lowered her eyes, gritted her teeth, and kept moving. But the palace walls had ears. And some of them didn't like change. Especially not the kind that came in plain linen dresses. Some servants turned cold. Doors that once opened with ease suddenly slammed shut. Tasks doubled. Mistakes invented. It was as if the palace itself was trying to remind her. You don't belong here. You never did. But Alira. She'd weathered colder storms. And though her hands shook sometimes, her spirit did not. Because every time she wanted to give up, she'd catch a glimpse of Cale. Not the prince, not the heir. Just the boy with tired eyes who once helped her pick up a broken tray in the hall. And she'd remember that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do in a place like this is simply stay kind and refuse to disappear. Love rarely announces itself. It tiptoes in, soft as a breeze, easy to miss, until it's everywhere. For Alira and Prince Cale, it didn't begin with fireworks. It began with a nod. A pause. A moment that could have passed unnoticed. But didn't. It was in the garden one morning. Alira had been sent to collect fallen petals for the perfumers. And there he was, Cale, alone, sitting on a stone bench. A book in his lap. But he wasn't reading. He looked up. Their eyes met. Just for a second. She gave a small curtsy, about to leave. But then, he spoke. You always come here at dawn. Not a question. An observation. And something in his voice wasn't royal. It was curious. Gentle. Human. She hesitated. Then answered, barely above a whisper. It's the only time the garden belongs to no one. He smiled. Not the kind he gave to nobles or guards. This one was real. And from that morning on, the garden slowly became theirs. They met in secret moments. Never planned, never spoken of. But always found. A shared bench under the willow tree. The warmth of silence. Conversations that tiptoed around duty. And danced toward dreams. He asked about her life. Not just where she came from. But who she was. What she loved. What she missed. And she listened to him the way no one ever had. Not as a prince. Not as a future king. But as a boy who'd never been allowed to choose. One morning, he showed her a scar on his palm. From sword training when he was 9. She showed him her calluses. From carrying buckets too big for her hands. He laughed softly. You've worked harder than half the council. She smiled. You've carried heavier crowns. Moments like that. Small. Simple. But they stitched something invisible between them. Something no silk or title could buy. But they weren't fools. They knew what it was they were risking. They knew eyes were always watching. They knew the world they lived in didn't make room for stories like theirs. And still, when the wind rustled the garden leaves, and her sleeve brushed his hand, neither pulled away. Because in a palace filled with masks and marble, they had found something rare. Something true. Something that felt a lot like love. Even if they didn't dare call it that. Yet, not all storms come with thunder. Some arrive quietly. With a whisper behind a closed door. And a letter sealed in wax. The first sign came in silence. Alira walked into the servants' quarters one morning. And the chatter stopped. Eyes glanced away. Hands froze mid-task. Someone dropped a cloth and didn't bother to pick it up. Something had changed. She felt it in her bones before she even knew why. Later that day, she was summoned. Not to the prince. Not to the garden. But to the high steward's chamber. She stood there, palms damp, while the man read from a parchment like it was just another task on his list. There has been an accusation, he said. The words that followed felt impossible. Theft. A missing ring from the dowager's chamber. One only a servant could have taken. And Alira, who'd never stolen so much as a ribbon, was suddenly the villain in someone else's tale. She tried to speak. To explain. But her voice caught in her throat. Her protests were dismissed. Her innocence, irrelevant. The decision had already been made. She was to be removed from the palace. Immediately. No trial. No investigation. Just a single, cruel sentence. You no longer belong here. They gave her 1 hour. 1 bag. No goodbyes. Not even to him. The garden was quiet when she passed it. She wanted to sit. To breathe. To hope he would come. But he didn't know. They hadn't told him. Maybe they'd never planned to. So she walked. Out of the gates. Through the courtyard where nobles whispered behind lace fans. No crown. No dignity. Just tear-filled eyes and aching feet. She thought of his hands. The way they brushed hers under the willow tree. She thought of his voice, soft and curious. The way it made her feel seen. And then she thought, maybe it was foolish to believe a prince could ever truly love a maid. But what she didn't know was that Cale was already searching for her. And when he found out the truth, he would burn every lie to the ground. Because when love is real, it doesn't vanish with orders. It doesn't bow to power. And it never, ever, lets go without a fight. The palace moved on as if nothing had happened. As if Alira's footsteps had never echoed through its halls. As if her smile had never brightened the morning light in the gardens. As if she had never existed at all. But Cale knew. He felt the silence. He saw the space she used to fill. And suddenly, the palace felt colder than ever before. He searched for her the next morning. First in the gardens. Then the library. Then the kitchen quarters where her laugh had once lingered. But she was gone. At first, no one would tell him why. Eyes dropped. Excuses stuttered. But he wasn't just a boy with questions anymore. He was the future king. And when he asked again, they told him. Theft. Accusation. Removal. But Cale knew her heart. He knew her hands, her soul, her truth. She would never steal. He didn't shout. He didn't storm through the halls. He simply stood still, eyes hard, voice quiet, and said, "Bring me the evidence." There was none. Because there never had been. Just a planted rumor. A whisper passed from mouth to mouth, until it became a lie too heavy to hold. He called the council to the chamber. Not as a prince seeking permission, but as a man done staying silent. "There will be an investigation," he said. "And until the truth is uncovered, I want her name restored." Gasps. Murmurs. Objections. But Cale didn't waver. Not this time. Because sometimes love isn't just gentle words and soft glances. Sometimes love is sharp. Unyielding. Louder than tradition. And stronger than fear. He sent guards to find her. To search beyond the walls. To bring her home. Days passed. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, a rider returned with a girl in a dusty cloak. And eyes full of disbelief. Alira. She stepped off the horse slowly, half believing it was a dream. Until she saw him. Standing there. Waiting. No guards. No crown. Just Cale. He walked toward her, and for the first time, he looked free. "I'm sorry," he said. "No titles. No speeches. Just truth. They tried to take you away. But they forgot something." He paused, eyes soft. "You were never just a maid to me." And in that moment, the walls of the palace didn't matter. The rules didn't matter. All that mattered was that love had fought back. And won. There are moments in life where time slows down. Not because the world stops, but because something is happening that your heart wants to remember forever. This was one of those moments. The palace courtyard was filled with people. Nobles in shimmering gowns. Guards in polished armor. Advisors whispering behind scrolls. And standing at the center, Alira. Her dress was simple. Hair pulled back, hands folded. No jewels. No titles. And yet, no one could look away. Because beside her, stood Prince Cale. Not as the cold, distant heir they thought they knew, but as the man who had chosen love over expectation. He took her hand, in front of everyone. No shadows, no secrets. Just truth. His voice was steady, but his eyes, they were filled with a kind of emotion you don't often see in a prince. "You changed everything," he said. "You reminded me who I was before they told me who I had to be." A pause. The whole court leaned in. Even the wind seemed to hush. "I don't care about the rules anymore. I don't care what's written in scrolls, or whispered in halls. I love you, Alira. And if you'll have me, I want you to be my queen." Gasps. Shock. And in the back, yes, even a faint, delighted laugh. But Alira. She didn't speak right away. Not because she was unsure, but because her heart was too full for words. She looked at him. This prince, this boy, who had once read fairy tales alone in the tower, and now stood before her, writing one of his own. She stepped closer, placed a hand on his cheek. "You never needed a queen," she whispered. "You just needed someone to see you. And I always did." And then, she nodded. "Yes." The courtyard erupted. Cheers. Applause. Even the stoniest councilman couldn't hide his awe. But to Alira and Gale, it all faded. Because in that moment, there were no crowns, no past, no expectations. Just a boy and a girl, who found each other, when the world said they never should. And somehow, changed everything. The crown sat gently on her head. Not heavy, not like she feared it would be. Because Alira had carried far heavier things. Grief, loneliness, hope. This was different. The people cheered her name. Some in surprise, some in joy, and some, still unsure. But she smiled anyway. Because she didn't need every heart. She just needed to stay true to her own. And Gale? He stood beside her. No longer a prince trying to fit someone else's mold, but a king who had chosen his path, with love at the center of it all. Together, they walked through the grand doors of the throne room, not as ruler and consort, not as a prince and a maid, but as equals, as partners, as two people who had defied every whisper, every rule, every carefully laid plan, all for the chance to live a life that was their own. Alira didn't forget where she came from. She still rose with the sun, still wandered the gardens barefoot, still greeted the palace staff by name. She made changes, quiet ones, kind ones. A new school for servant children. A place at the council table for those without titles. She reminded the kingdom that grace could grow from the most unexpected soil. And on quiet evenings, you could still find her and Gale beneath the willow tree, laughing about spilled tea and stolen glances, like nothing had ever changed. And yet, everything had. Because this wasn't just a love story. It was a beginning. A promise. That no matter who you are, where you come from, or how quietly your life begins, you are never too small to change your story. And sometimes, the crown finds its way to the one who never asked for it, but always deserved it most. And just like that, a maid became a queen. Not because of magic. Not because of fate. But because she dared to be kind, even when the world told her not to be. If this story made you feel something, hopeful, seen, maybe even a little teary-eyed, you're not alone. We all want to believe that love can conquer status. That goodness gets noticed. That even quiet hearts can be heard. And if you believe in stories that start small and end big, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe to Heartfelt Tales TV for more tales like this one. Until then, be kind, be curious, and never stop believing that your story is still unfolding.